So this is our new series for this operations calling. So this is what we're calling continuous transformation in action. And what it is 30-minute presentations of how real app builders and real people are using Tulip to improve their operations. So the first one in this three-part series is when a logbook project becomes a digital movement. So in this session, you'll hear how a logbook digitalization project became a full transformation of Jazz Pharmaceuticals production processes. Joining us today, we have Jason Gillespie, digital enterprise capabilities business partner at Jazz Pharmaceuticals, with over 15 years of experience driving digital transformation across a variety of industries. And then we have Julian Witrock, associate director of Frontwell Solutions. Julian is a global technical lead with over 4 years of experience implementing Tulip in GXP-related industries. So I'll hand it over to them.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. I know it's early in the morning, and I'm looking around. We don't have too many people with sore heads, so I hope you kind of enjoyed the networking. We've certainly taken value in that, being here. It's an absolute privilege to be here today. I'm also joined by Julian, who was involved in the very early parts of our project. So he was involved in our pilot. And as we go through, you'll see where Julian's kind of knowledge and breadth of experience kind of leveraged advantage to us and our transformation. So should we get started? We'll just start with quick introductions. So Jazz Pharma, we really are an international biopharma. We focus primarily in the neuroscience and the oncology space. And really our target is kind of those, specialty unmet needs for patients. So we don't really do mass, manufacture. We kind of do niche manufacture. So it's pretty specialized. Won't go into detail. This is my a mixture of, I think we're supposed to call it career highlights. I'd also call it trauma through my career. And then sort of really fun fact for me is I decided to project manage my own house extension. Two things I learned from that is, I can do project management, but I'm still useless at DIY. So that's a little fun fact from my side. Julian, just want to introduce yourself quick?
My name is Julian Witrock. I work for Frontwell Solutions now for 4 years, and we've been implementing Tulip solutions across different life science projects, both EBR and non-EBR solutions. And we do all sorts of other MES and LIMS solutions. So I think that helps us bring the right level of understanding to all of your processes. And so we've been working together. I think we started this journey 3 years ago.
You're setting up the next slide very well. So if we move on to the next one, what we really wanted to do here was basically show you the journey. So we want to set the scene. For us, it started back in 2021, so you're not far off. Our internal network, I think the buzzword for the time back in the early 20s was not AI, which is what the current buzzword is, right? It was data. We need our data, right? We need everything digital. So our internal network, and that's a combination of 3 sites in Europe, we got a cross-functional team together, and we did what we thought was an MES RFP at the time. I'm not going to get into the term MES, but it's one of those terms that really sets our leaders on the back foot. 2 words, ERP implementations, MES implementations, they are monsters to deploy, right? They're rarely done on time. They're very monolithic in nature. And MES impacts your plants, right? You're going to hit downtime. So we don't use the term MES anymore, right? And when we went through that RFP and we kind of did the readout and actually determined what we needed, we found that we didn't need the full breadth of an MES. Sure, it would have been nice, but actually critically for us to improve our processes internally, we needed more of a digital operations platform, which is where Tulip kind of came in. So we made the decision sort of in sort of the end of that year to kind of really pilot it. So this is where kind of Frontwell came in. We executed that pilot, and as part of that pilot then we measured where we are today and where we wanted to be. We also kind of had a common set of pain points to guide us, and we built a bit of a kind of ROI metric on this. Kind of those key points really. We wanted to eliminate manual process, that man-hour wastage. We wanted to kind of improve our quality oversight, reduce our deviations, give quality a better lens on our processes. And then with our manual processes, it really was kind of inhibitive to us. We couldn't then scale that. We couldn't use some of these fancy tools that you see in some of the sessions today, AI, stuff like that. You need good data, right? And we didn't have that at the time. So then we kind of deployed that pilot. Did you want to just quickly touch on that pilot very briefly?
I think two main points that come to my mind is, first of all, you included all sites very early on, right? And you rolled this out into the most critical manufacturing areas. So you had a lot of SMEs and operators got very early on an exposure to Tulip and knew what was coming, right? And they saw the benefits. You got all the right stakeholders involved very early. And the other key thing, I think you mentioned already, is the metrics you defined. And that's what we saw throughout this whole project until today. Every time that we come across a new use case, we apply these same metrics, the ROI, and select then the next use case that we think is relevant. And I think that was very important for the
hugely good point. And I think that really is an entry gate to us. When we want to digitalize something, we challenge test it. What is it doing for us? How's it kind of transforming? What benefits is it bringing? So yeah, that pilot, the other thing we did in that pilot is we made sure our internal network got hands-on. So we deployed one app in each of our manufacturing areas, and we gave it to those areas for 2 weeks. And we said, have at it, right? Break it, test it, run it in parallel with your existing process. Then we remeasured, right? So what they were doing manually, now what does it look like electronically? And we got some, we don't need to archive anymore. We don't need to transport our logbooks around. So we got some really good insights out of that. Then we kind of did a pilot readout. That was really successful. And again, I'm IT. I'm used to putting systems in and trying to get business functions to adapt to these systems. Here, we were being pulled by manufacturing and the ops teams. It's the most cynical bunch you can deal with, right? If they don't like it, they're going to tell you, and they really are going to tell you. So it was refreshing for us. They were pulling us. We want this. We want to do this. So that was really kind of invigorating for the team. We then scaled up. So we do it. Manufacture, field, pack is one area of our manufacturing, and we have our API process on the other side. So we went for our manufacture, field, pack. It's what we call BDP in our UK plant. And this is where sort of the first call out comes really for Frontwell. So we started that, and I think if you've heard some of the other talk with AstraZeneca yesterday on their panel, they were like, the value is not in Logbook, right? And funnily enough, our project team came back to us very early on and went, guys, we were doing a Logbook project, but actually we want to digitalize our process, our entire process. So we had a few very pressure testing moments with Frontwell on how we adapt the project. And then we took that decision, and we actually did end-to-end process. And we'll get into what that looks like shortly. And then, we are where we are today. We've just finished that digitalization for BDP. And as a result of that, the senior leadership team, I'm working on the term paperless factory because it is very much an aspiration. That's the term they want to use. We now have a 2030 target for our internal sites where we don't have any of our processes manual. That's a challenge in itself, but we won't get in that today. But it was really good to see that output from our senior leadership teams come back with that positive kind of direction from that project. So how did we kind of structure this is a key thing I've heard sort of in conversation over the last few days. So really it starts from the left. We started with a core group, our project management group, our stakeholders. We had our Tulip customer success manager that was kind of independent from our integrator, right? So we wanted to make sure, and Rebecca's here, and Ashley was involved in the early days, we had that independent kind of, conduit with Tulip. And then in parallel, we had a Frontwell presence, right? So we had a Frontwell PM. Those guys, kind of with the stakeholders and some of the key users, looked at how we were going to structure that project, and we split it into 3 containers. The platform, which is the boring techie stuff, right? It's how do you get it set up? How do we get it ready for scale? How do we deploy it across multiple sites? Sort of all that forward-thinking stuff. Julian was our solution architect at the time, so he was talking with our IS lead. He looks very similar to me. He's around somewhere today. Nathan is my brother. He was the IS technical lead for this. So any techie questions, I'll point you to him. And then as we went through, we had key kind of roles. They were involved from the start, right? So we had our digital QA team, our site QA teams, our commercial QA, our QAV. We had those entire groups set up and involved from the start, but they also had pairing with Frontwell SME groups. So they had that direct conduit. And we ran this in kind of I hate using cliche terms, but this was kind of like an agile project. So these were work streams. Sure, there were some dependencies, but also they could kind of work independently. So on the process, they were out doing the discovery early. They weren't just mapping what they do today into digital. The first thing they were doing was challenging. This is what we do now. It's not fit for digital, right? We've got to adapt. So they were doing that OE type of exercise on the process and their SOPs and everything around it. So they were really kind of doing that work while the governance was being set up. The governance was then in place when we got to doing the validation, and we kind of will go into that in a bit more detail. The other really huge call out is we had a citizen developer program at the start. So again, we'll get into that in a bit more detail, but the majority of our citizen developers were not technical people. We have one of our team. They were process SMEs first, with a challenge mindset, I think is probably the summary there. And we had them in through the start, getting involved, working with Frontwell, getting exposure to Tulip, really kind of, there's a whole program around that. Catch me afterwards if you want to see how we kind of implemented that. Hugely successful. It did take time, but it was effective, and it's now allowing us to scale. Anything you wanted to cover on the Frontwell side from a...
Yeah, I think just shortly, I think this is a usual setup we see where we place a counterpart from Frontwell's side on your side, right? So for example, it's the solution architect defines with your IS lead, like the playpen. I like to call it the playpen, so really defining like the data model, the templates, common functionalities that then later on the process can use, right? So they really know what they can work with, and if there's anything outside of that, they need to play it back to our solution architect, align it with your QA lead, and then we need to see like if that fits, right?
Yeah.
So
that's kind of how we set the project framework. And to be honest, that still runs today. There's some adaptation to this as we've learned as we've gone along, but we found this to be really effective, and actually it is allowing us to deploy pretty quickly. So going into the team and how that works, we're then going to kind of the approach. Really, we've kind of bucketed this into blocks. It's far more complicated than a PowerPoint. Let's kind of go into, but really we broke it down into that, that planning and design, doing that sort of challenge testing, getting all of the process discovery done. We had a few gates, right? Process map, 101 stuff, have it. What does it look like now? What is it going to look like? That was challenge tested. Then we kind of went into the detail around sort of our validation suite. What's the user requirements for that process? What's the risks around that process? What's the success criteria look like? When you're done, what do you want this to be doing? And then obviously the validation and how we approach that, which we will get into, I promise, in a second. That strategy, applying that strategy across that application. Now, application and process is a really cryptic thing because you can have multiple applications engage with one process. So we're trying to define that ecosphere early. Then we kind of went into the development and the execution phases, and these were done in sort of 2 weekly sprints. And we gated it. We had 2 sessions a week, half a day, where we would have some determined outcomes, what we wanted to do at the end of that session. That would then get implemented, applied, and then there would be a feedback the following week. So it was kind of a cycle. Didn't start perfect, but we kind of got into the scheme of and the routine of it as we went along, right? So during that development process, we were also continuously feeding up. We were continuously feeding out. We were trying to make this kind of as open as we could from a comms perspective to make sure everybody understood what we were doing, because this was a hugely sort of transformational thing for us. And again, technology is there now and it's great, but actually it's more of a people change, a culture change, a process change. That's what we were really sort of communicating across. The technology is last mile stuff. I know Tulip guys might not like me saying it, but in our world, that's the reality, right? And the composable kind of component of Tulip really played its strength here. It allowed us to carve up quite a nuanced process and attack it in very logical, sequential steps. Then we went into the sort of the implementation part, the technical bits, the end user experience kind of components. How is it going to be used within the environment. Again, we had shadowing here, so our sit devs were heavily involved. You know, they were doing the work alongside Frontwell. And when they got a bit of confidence, the roles were switched. They were kind of pushing, and Frontwell were watching. The same thing, we had feedback in kind of sprint fashion, right? So this worked really well. We started off thinking we were only going to deploy 10 apps. That was the very early scope of our project. We doubled the scope, right? And also it went into a degree of complexity that we didn't expect when we started. But again, Tulip strength, right? The adaptability of what we're doing. And then we're going into the last, but probably one of the most controversial points, the validation. You know, we had a very big back and forth with our quality groups on how we validate this system. And I've heard this a lot, especially with the peers that are in pharma that I've kind of been networking with. Still a big topic. How we did it is we split platform and apps, right? So our site quality teams took control of the app validation because the closest thing to it is process, right? They're interested in the process. And then our digital quality teams took kind of responsibility for the platform, the governance around that, how apps lifecycle development is done. They set that structure, and then site QA teams are then kind of enforcing that structure. We had a very big debate. How aggressive do we validate this, right? We're unsure on how we're doing it. And as we walked through and we kind of were doing our risk assessment, this stuff is all new to us, right? We don't know what composability really means. We don't have any internal SMEs that are familiar with Tulip. This was all new. So we high-risked this. We went, okay, we're going to throw the book at it, and we're going to do a mixture of unit testing and process testing. So if we go on to the next slide, open and honest here, we ended up doing, this took 4 weeks, by the way, and we did pre-warn QA. We said, you want us to do this, you need to be able to review it, and you need to be able to review it at pace. So you can see there, it was a mixture of, we did it by application, we did 174 test runs, which doesn't sound like a lot. This is kind of concatenated test runs, and then we recorded this as well. So we had 219 recorded sessions. That was 33 hours of executed validation, right? So QA could actually look through and see what this looked like, see the process in the digital world, and they actually loved it. The issue with quality was they gave us 3 SMEs from quality. They doubled it to do this review. But that was 4,673 individual test steps, and out of all of those test steps, we had 46 defects. And those defects were largely human error. And one thing we found with the Tulip platform when we were doing this is we weren't aware of, you know, when you port apps from instances, those triggers have all got to be reconnected, right? And we were learning this early on. So those were failing, and we were finding them. And then what we were doing is we implemented a checklist when we were doing those migrations. So what this allowed us to do is throw the book at it, go back. QA now have the confidence in the system. So now they're not so interested in Tulip and how it works. They're more interested in the process side of things. How we kind of did that, sort of on this side, really, it's almost like mini design packages by process, by app. So we have a design phase where your user requirements, your risk assessment's done on that process. We then have a specification, and that specification really is a combination of your risk assessment, your specification table, how it works, user requirements. It's all kind of self-contained. That then sets us up for what we need to do from a testing side. So we build the test scripts. And then at the end, there is a release certificate for those apps. That is a mini Val report, basically. And it's a bit of an organic document. So as the apps kind of go up in versions, it's telling the story, what the changes were, what the defects were, what it's doing now from what it was doing before. The hugely important thing as well is quality have the last mile say. So the approval process in Tulip, QA also do the release. So they absolutely do the sense check-in, the sit devs get it ready for the release, and then QA will review, and when they're happy, they contact the shop floor, they hit the button, the version upgrades. So it really gave quality that power, right? We continue to use this, but now obviously our effort will be reduced because we've done that kind of pressure test on the system.
Yeah, I hope we can build on that trust.
Yeah. So what does it look like today? I think this was the wow moment, I think, for the shop floor. There we go. Yeah. So this is a very big combination of how it currently looks. And we've got 3 lenses, right? We have the management cockpit that's giving us our schedule, what's coming up over the next few weeks. It's giving 7-day to 30-day look backs, how many batches have gone through. This is our dev instance, by the way. I wasn't allowed to show the production instance, but you get kind of a measure here, right? So from a management lens, they see the schedule adherence, they see some of the OE metrics, they see our cycle times on a per batch basis. Then we have the level down, where I say the real work happens. Probably need a shot for that later on. But the supervisory layer, which is really, it digs in, where they can trend, you see there, the spikes are batches. Why did, this FT number take an extra hour, right? It's giving them that extra set of insights on per batch. It allows them to drill in, work out where they need to focus their attention on. So that's kind of the management lens, and we didn't really scope metrics as part of this. We focused on the execution. The metrics actually came out afterwards, and through them on the back foot, this is still being adjusted as they go, but it gives them something to really get their teeth into. From an ecosphere perspective, if we kind of summarize very briefly what that looks like, this is effectively, I think the PowerPoint's gone out a bit there, but effectively on a process perspective, our line clearances are there, manufacturing process is there, our filling process and our packaging process is there, and all the associated assets are also attached to this. Campaign cleans, cycle counts, our equipment validation cycles are all kind of part of that. It's kind of a nice pictorial. When it displays properly, it's a nice pictorial of what it looks like. So really, as an example of some of those apps, what do some of those apps look like? If we flick into the next one, the one I'm going to call out in the bottom right corner is actually one that was built entirely by our citizen development group. Didn't need Frontwell, sorry Frontwell, but we've got some of our internal SMEs now coming up with some of these continuous improvements, and I think that's a big call out. This will never stop, it will evolve, and you need internal teams to do that. Use your integrators to do that real heavy lift, and get your SMEs doing the smaller things to build the confidence. There's a real mix of things here, right? So we have a scheduler that allows them to do last mile changes to schedule. ERP does the forecasting, but then when it hits the shop floor, things happen, right? They need to move schedules around. That allows the manufacturing teams to do that, and then it will feed back up. We've got the vessel cleaning cycles. We made that very graphical. See the difference there. And then we have our filling app, which is more, it's data input here. And we kind of catered this to our ops teams and how that looks, right? So templated, we've got a standard there, but kind of the detail and how things are, we can change this around, make it more visual, give them history of the equipment. It really is quite flexible in what we do. So I wanted to make sure you guys saw that, because I don't think you've seen many examples from a customer perspective. And then we're flipping to the real nuts and bolts. How does it look? And what I will do is I will hand Julian that
Sure.
component.
Thanks. So I hope you can see this. This is we try to fit all of our apps that we've developed over time now onto this one slide. So really what this shows is this is all the statuses that you see here are mirroring the status that we actually have for all of our equipments, batches, and so on. So you see top left, you see our scheduling app. I saw yesterday actually in the Experience Center a very nice scheduling tool, but as a custom widget. So I'm hoping to see this some time evolve into like a native Tulip functionality, which would be great. And then you see here how this is that we built this line clearance app. When there's a product change, this is automatically then pulling up our product change clean logbook. And so you see here all these dependencies. Once you go into a manufacturing process, this is then looking at all the logbooks that are needed. So if there's any status that is not correctly set up from our manufacturing apps, you can immediately jump into the logbooks, right? Perform the clean, set the status right, do the calibration. And basically this is like all the dependencies that we have. We also looked at parallel work. How can we make things more efficient, right? You can set up the next line when you've worked on line one, and so this is really like the whole process map. And because we speak of a digital movement, right, we now look at all the other use cases and how they integrate here, and this map will grow. And I don't know if we...
And I think that the big thing is it's mirroring our production process, right? So all of these little people symbols there used to be a second check at every stage. Now Tulip's taken a lot of that out, right? It's doing a lot of this enforcement and the rail guards before. Happy to go into deeper dive on that. I know we're kind of running short on time, but we wanted to make sure you saw that and how that looked and how we applied it within the Tulip kind of ecosphere. So really, we're quickly cap on lessons learned. I think there's a lot we learned from the first phase. We're pulling that into the second phase, but I think our biggest takeaway is the team involvement from the start, especially QA, your sort of supporting teams, really essential. And then the second one, scope. Keep your scope rigid. We've got 183 improvements we want to put in BDP, right? It was really at risk of creating fires, right, and derailing us on a scope side. And here is sort of what you see on the bottom is kind of what our actual real-time savings are from a man-hours perspective, from a deviation avoidance perspective. We're tracking carbon kind of reduction as well. And we've got the real-time analytics, and we're using those as guiding principles. Just quickly on...
Scope control?
Scope control, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a recurring topic for us, right? We always face this challenge of balancing Tulip's flexibility with not overextending the scope here, right? And so we usually try to time gate it, first of all, but we've seen also with you, working with you, like the more operators and SMEs got to know Tulip,
the better, yeah.
The better times was spent on the discovery phase, right? And we were able to unlock a lot of tribal knowledge, and they understood that all these edge cases that we wouldn't see on paper, right? They had to be brought up in that discovery phase, right? And so in the early apps, we saw a lot of this just slowly revealing, and the more you get used to Tulip now, we find these edge cases earlier, and so this discovery phase, I think, we should spend more time on this.
Yeah. So let's flick quickly to what we're looking at over the next few years. Now, roadmaps in this world, in pharma especially, always changes, right? But this is our commitment over the next couple of years on what we're doing. And you can see more work streams are spinning up, and this is where the citizen developers kind of really start kicking in, right? So they will start taking these initiatives along. We are quite aggressive in what we're trying to do, but from the success of what we've done so far, this is kind of our ambition over the next few years. We're actually hoping to condense and use some of the scalability, right? Reuse some of the stuff that we're doing right now. But jury's out on if we hit that. That's our ambition. I just wanted to show this because it's quite powerful. If I said to our quality groups, we're going to look at EMBRs and we're going to do that in a year, they would have laughed, right? They would have laughed me out the room. But actually what we're seeing with this system and how effective it is to deploy, we think we can do this with our products over the next few years. And then I think sort of if we just go to the last slide, just quickly, I didn't want to kind of, finish this off without really a shout out to the team that made this happen. It was the people that were involved. And the real thing I want to point out is there is only one IT person in that photo. Everyone else is either from manufacturing, QA, MSAT, right? And that one person, yeah, that's the guy that looks like me, right? He is the only technical person in that group. We've got the citizen developers at the top. Laura, who's our PM, she's a scientist by trade. The two ladies in the top right, they're the BDP supervisors that essentially architected this whole process. So I think I pay homage to them as my closing statement. So I hope you found that insightful. I know we overran a little bit, but we really wanted to kind of share our journey with you today.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. Unfortunately, we want to stay on schedule, so we're going to move on to the next one. But please find Julian and Jason afterwards for questions.
All right. Thanks all.
Thank you.